Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi here, Democratic strategist and host of That Trippi Show and my new show, On the Ground with Joe Trippi. With me once again is the other Joe, celebrated journalist Joe Klein. Joe's been covering political campaigns for a long time, and I've sure been running them, but not just as long, almost, but not as long. Sometimes we agree, other times not so much. We do have a special guest. Joe, we'll get to that. But first, Joe, news of the day, and where do you want to get started?
Well, I think that we have to, I just dropped a new publication on Sanity Clause about what has happened with Iran this week. The point to be made here is that never before in American history has a president of the United States signed an agreement, an international agreement that ratified retreat and reparations. And with that, I want to toss to you because your stat of the week has to do with that.
Up to 400 billion stat of the week. And unfrozen assets, that's about an estimated $100 billion that Iran will get upon signing this thing. And investment funds, 300 billion more to be made to invest in rebuilding and reparations, as you put it. So about $400 billion is what Trump has signed off on. What's fascinating about this, as many of you know, and maybe if you watched the Obama opening of the Obama Center today, which I thought was amazingly moving, and a direct contrast in class and empathy and diversity and and what a president, reminder of how we used to see our presidents before Trump. What's fascinating to me is he complained often about the 1.7 billion or the few billion that Biden and Trump and Obama, as they were working with Iran to keep the nuclear deal going forward. He thought that was way too much money, and now he's signed off on 400 billion, and they still have, with nothing about in the agreement about that certifies anything's going to happen with the nuclear material, et cetera, so enriched material. So anyway, Joe, that's my stat of the week. Where do you want? What's your quote?
Well, here, I want to introduce our guest, and she is an old friend of mine and source of mine and hero of mine. She is talk about contrasts between the president and someone who actually is a courageous American hero. I give you Dr. Deborah Kenny, and here is what she does. This is the quote of the week. Too often, civics education alone falls short if students learn how a bill becomes a law, but spend 13 years in institutions that do not ask them to do the hard work of exercising judgment, taking responsibility, and sustaining respectful relationships. It seems to, that's a quote from Dr. Deborah Kenny, who is the author of a new book called The Well-Educated Child. And it seems to me that that's a quote that should apply to the entire society, that should, especially on this day when we have agreed to the most embarrassing end of war agreement in American history. The question is whether the American people are actually going to recognize that. But let me tell you about Deborah for a moment. I've known her for how many years, Deborah? Maybe 20 years now. And she...
Hey, Joe, don't tell everybody how old I am.
No, well, you look terrific.
Yeah.
But Deborah has done this.
I got it.
She has done this amazing thing. She started with one middle school in Harlem, a charter school that she founded. And those who know education and those who know children know that the middle school years are the toughest because hormones are introducing themselves and running rampant. But she made a success of that school. She started 2 more middle schools, 2 more elementary schools, and a high school. We'll get back to that high school in a minute. And a Montessori preschool. And her schools score at the very top of the charts in New York State. But more important than that, she got there very, very easily, very quickly. But she realized maybe 10, 15 years ago that just scoring well on tests wasn't enough, that to really create successful citizens, an education had to do more. And about that high school, 100% of her graduates go on to college. And these schools, Harlem Village Academies, are among the best schools I've ever seen. And the question is, Deborah, simply 25 words or more, how'd you do it?
Well, first I'll go back to the quote that you introduced, and thank you for that very gracious and generous introduction. What's important is that students are learning how to have productive, constructive arguments. And I think when you say how was it done, I think it was an engine of dissatisfaction. I was just continually dissatisfied. As I wrote in the book, I was unhappy with myself. I was dissatisfied with what we had. The idea that the kids are behaving and scoring well on tests, and therefore we are now categorized as high performing, or as people say, closing the achievement gap. And it made me ask, well, what do you mean? I guess that depends on how do you define achievement, right? And so I think that it was a matter of continual dissatisfaction, continual curiosity, intellectual curiosity. I wanted to learn more. I wanted the kids to have more than just proficiency of the basics.
Well, let's take a specific example of how your method works. And to me, this is the threshold example. How do you get kids? Oh, by the way, we should say that your students come to you via lottery. They are not assigned by the state and not assigned
right.
and not selected by you. It's a lot that gets them there. And they come from mostly a pretty poor neighborhood. And the first question, the threshold question is, how do you get them to behave? How do you get them to sit still and listen? And I think that the example that you give in The Well-Educated Child shows us a lot about your whole method. But okay, student walks into kindergarten, and what happens on the first day?
Right. Well, that's a really important point, because behavior is the thing that a lot of us struggle with the most in schools, and B, the thing that you must have if learning is to occur. So a lot of focus in schools has been on how do you get kids to behave. And it was for us as well in the early years. So to answer your question, in kindergarten, what do you do? I'm going to tell you a 2-part answer. One is, what did we used to do? And then what do we do now and why? And how is it different and better? What we used to do is focus on how are we going to get kids to behave, period. That was the question. And it was a valid question, because they can only learn if they're behaving. If there's 2 kids running around and screaming out of 25, right? So we taught them routines for everything. How do you enter the classroom? How do you have a discussion? How do you get a book? How do you have to ask permission for things or not? Just routines for every single thing. And we had an orientation with 15 lessons. Things like when a teacher gives an instruction, you follow it right away and all the way. When somebody is speaking, you're looking and listening, just the basics. That accomplished one thing, which was after a number of years, you could walk into any classroom. I would say to people, just take a self-guided tour, walk around. You could walk into any one of our 25 classrooms and the kids were behaving beautifully. You know, the other key to that was what I call 100% of kids 100% of the time. And what that meant was if you say, okay, pencils down, eyes on me, or whatever it is you say as the teacher, that you expect 100% every single kid. And this is important because you want the kids to realize I matter. So if the teacher says everybody's looking and I'm not, and if the teacher then stops and stares at me, you know, that quiet, we call it giving the look, right? On the one hand, it shows I'm the adult. I just said something, you're going to listen to it. So on the one hand, it establishes the high expectation. But on the other hand, it also says to the kid, I care about you. I notice you. You matter. And you are perfectly capable. So that high expectation following through, insisting, following through. If you do this for 7 weeks, then in the beginning, the kids might test you and you have to hold firm. But by the end of 7 weeks, all the behaviors you want that you taught and then insisted on become non-cognitive habit. They become second nature. And the kids are now, they're happy, they're respectful, and the teacher is able to teach. Now, all of that is what we accomplished in the first 10 years. But then I thought about it and realized, and also I was seeking out advice from mentors and people, the brightest minds in the country, really, coming into our schools and learning from them. And what became evident is that we have behavior, but we don't have agency. And we have joy, but it's with compliance. And that there's a higher level, which is student independence. But why doesn't everybody do this? Because it's really hard. To get kids to be respectful and independent rather than just compliant, it's important, but it's really hard. And so we then spent years discovering, learning, and figuring out systems for agency at the center. And that's a whole other story, but that's what we aspired to. And in the book, The Well-Educated Child, I describe exactly how we did it. And so now we have kids who are behaving, but it's because they care, not because there's a reward or a punishment.
But also because, and I think that you have to explain the term agency to our civilian audience.
Yes.
It means that the kids create the rules that rule the classroom. They do it cooperatively. Right. And it is a remarkable process, but it is the first thing that they do together.
Right. You want me to get into that a little bit?
Yes, because that's what really distinguishes what you're doing.
Because when I would get the look, and it just never really worked on me. But I'm really interested in that.
Maybe I have to try it on you.
Yeah.
So first, to answer your question, what is agency? It essentially means that you're self-directed. And so agency in school or agency in life, you're self-directed. To elaborate that a little more, you take initiative, you care about the quality of your work, you care about how you comport yourself, you follow through, you're resourceful, you're persistent, you're running your life, you're running your life, you're owning your life. So it's being self-directed, it's self-management, right? Now, how we do it now differently is that in the beginning of the year, we ask the kids, it's a process. First, how do you want to feel at school? And what's amazing is they will say the most personal, profound things, like, I want to feel safe. I want to feel like I matter. I want to feel that I can make a mistake and won't be made fun of, and you chart this, you write it on a chart, everything they say, and they go around in a circle. Then you ask them, okay, after maybe 15 minutes of them all sharing, look at how you all had so much in common about how you want to feel. Well, as a class, we are going to create now together a set of commitments. And, if they're younger, you define what commitment means. But this is really a microcosmic form of self-governance. We're going to create a set of commitments to each other so that we will all feel this way. So if we want to feel this way, how do we have to treat each other? Everybody silently think, write. And so they think and write for a little while, and then you have them, okay, share in with your partner, and they talk a little. Then we go around in a circle again and say, so how do we have to treat one another in order for us to all feel the way we want to feel? You see how they have ownership because of the way you phrase the question? One of the most important things as an educator is the quality and nature of the questions you ask. And then once they've charted that about how they have to treat each other, you say, okay, and you edit and you refine. How are we going to uphold this? If somebody breaks one of these commitments, what are we going to do about that? And then they come up with ideas for that. So it's this process where they created themselves the rules that they're going to live by. Now, that does not mean that we don't have rules. We have rules. We're very strict. There's no cell phones. There's no gum, et cetera, et cetera. If God forbid you did something really bad, like bring a weapon or had a fight, there are severe consequences, of course. But I'm talking about just the agreements about how they're going to live together as a community, right? Those ideas, they created it. Therefore, they are more committed to it.
So how do you sustain that? I'm really curious about this. When everywhere else in the world, the communities at each other's throats, and I mean, in other words, like it just seems to me like in the classroom that holds, and then how it just comes back the next day, even though they go off into the world where everything is tribal and all the things that you're going against everything that you've created in the classroom. Or maybe I'm missing. I just wanted to understand how's it work.
So you're saying how do we sustain it as they become adults in society?
No, from day to day, because your experience
as children in the school, how do we sustain it?
Yeah, well, the thing is that the experience that you are creating there, or that they are creating for themselves, is so much at variance with the rest of the world that they exist in.
Yeah, with the adults in the world.
How do you get that to? How do you sustain that? I mean, I know that you worry about them backsliding when they go off for a week on Christmas vacation.
Well, so I think there's two answers. One is how do we continue that process through the year, but the other is more academic. So for the first, we say to the kids, okay, we created these rules, but what are we going to do in a month or in 3 months when you're really frustrated and you're tired and somebody broke one of these commitments? And then we have an advisory or a community circle once a week where the kids, some of it is daily and some of it is weekly, but essentially we're looking at the commitments on a regular basis and saying acknowledgements and apologies in relation to the commitments. I mean, it's amazing to watch like a second or third grader, let alone a high school student, right? Say, I want to apologize to John because I broke out laughing when he made a mistake in math, and I really didn't mean to do that. Or an apology for, not playing with you on the playground, whatever that may be. Or teaching them acknowledgments, I want to acknowledge Susan for sitting with me in the cafeteria when I was all by myself. And because of the thing that happened, nobody else was sitting with me. So every week you return to it, these do not sustain themselves. That's one. The second thing, which is academic, is that hugely important to teach kids how to have constructive arguments and how to regularly argue about ideas in an intellectual way rather than just following the mob and going by what's cool. And that's an equally important part of it.
I think that one of the things that we should make clear is that these kind of sessions, these circles, as you call them, are structured in to the school day and the school week. So they're constantly being reinforced.
Right. And I just also want to note that I did not invent all of this, most of this. I learned it. There's wisdom of the last half a century. A lot of it gets lost or got lost. It's a part of why I wrote The Well-Educated Child, because I didn't want other people to have to struggle as much as I did just to learn and figure out how to do some of these things when the ideas already existed. You know, there's a lot of wisdom, really since Montessori and over the last 100 years. And it does tend to get lost rather than passed along from generation to generation. So I part of why I wrote The Well-Educated Child is to put all of the best thinking in one place from the last 100 years. And so I did not invent most of this. I learned it.
But the other really important point to make about this book is that it's not just about how you educate kids in a desperately poor neighborhood.
Oh,
it's how you can better educate kids in every neighborhood. There is a universality to these lessons, to giving kids the kind of social tools that enable them not only to treat each other and the school with respect, but also enables them to think creatively about who they want to be and what kind of projects they want to pursue in school.
But that's kind of my point, though, where this is all, there are a lot of adults rolling around in the world today, and particularly in the United States, who were not the well-educated child, who do not treat each other with respect. We have a president who won't apologize for anything. And you're teaching kids to, I mean, you say they spontaneously apologize for making fun of somebody messing up at math. Two things. Is the book, can we fix any of that? And what I'm saying is, as these children then get into that world, where they're watching, a failure of an adult who doesn't apologize. How do they, are they taking these lessons and you think are sustaining them as adults later on? And I'm still trying to get at, how do we fix the bigger problem of, obviously, if we could wave a wand and have every school teaching and learning, children learning and being well educated, it seems to me it's a lot of the reason we're in the mess we're in now. It's because that there was a failure, or maybe I'm not trying to create controversy. I'm just trying to get your take on all that.
Yeah. Well, I think there were 3 or 4 questions in there. So let me, and all of which are interesting. I'll start with the point you made about that the book was written to be relevant to all kids. It took 8 years for me to write this. And specifically in the last 3 years, I became more disconcerted about the state of society, the state of education, and the direction that education is going in, both at K-12 and at the university level. And I'm talking about some of the wealthiest neighborhoods and across the socioeconomic spectrum, we are not doing right by our children. And we need to really think seriously about what is going on in schools right now. So yes, absolutely, The Well-Educated Child was written for all people who care about children of every socioeconomic level. And in some ways, I thought about, well, what do I want for my own children? Because when you write, if you write and think about something and you relate it to what you care about the most, like you care about your own children the most, then you can come up with the most important ways of explaining it. And so I was thinking about, well, what do I want for my future grandchildren, right, when I wrote the book? So that's the first point. In terms of how to sustain it, the more you give tools the kids to think in a very deep way about everything and be really skeptical and have agency, meaning be self-directed. It's a combination. The answer to your question about how do you sustain it as they grow into adults, to me, it's the combination of skepticism, informed skepticism, as the great Ted Sizer said, and self-direction. Those two things combined. And so over and over and over, I mean, hundreds of times throughout high school, they need to be engaged in arguments about ideas where they are required to back up what they say with not only with a source, but with a coherent line of reasoning. So those two things combined is how you sustain it. And there's a third piece, which is when I talk about ethical purpose, showing them that and giving them a sort of sense that there is a such thing as purpose, and why were you put on this earth, and how are you going to contribute to the greater good, and helping them to be intrinsically motivated about how they'll use their lives for a higher purpose.
One of the most striking things to me is in visiting your schools and visiting any one of your classrooms is that there's the teacher up front who's asking the questions and directing the show. And then there's, as often as not, there's a teacher in the back who is taking notes on how the teacher in front is teaching. And that kind of constant peer support seems to me very important to your equation, because if you're going to have schools, this goes to Joe's question, if you're going to try and replicate this on a national basis, you're going to have some pretty special teachers. And at the end of the book, you talk about having teaching be as respected and valued in society as being a doctor or lawyer or any other kind of professional. Now, teachers always say we want to be treated like professionals.
And they should be.
But they don't want to have the accountability that professionals have.
I don't know if that's true. I think teachers are. I don't know if that's true of all. But what you're getting at, what's the essence of the question you're getting at?
The question I'm getting at is that the nature of teaching has to change, and the nature of people who want to become teachers has to change, which means the society has to change its attitude toward teachers.
Well, as you know, I very seriously believe that teachers should be paid like doctors and lawyers, and that, of course, there has to be accountability in the system. I have found that the most talented people love working in a culture of accountability, because it means that the people they're working with, care as much as they do. And accountability doesn't have to mean, and shouldn't mean, that there's like somebody walking in with a checklist, making sure you're doing certain things. I mean, the highest form of accountability And what I always say to our school principals is that as a leader, the best thing you can do is not hold teachers accountable, but create a culture in which they will hold themselves accountable. Now, that starts with hiring people who are intrinsically motivated to begin with. They care deeply about kids. They care about the quality of their work. They're really smart and really good at what they do. And it's just the kind of person who, wants to make sure their lesson is really excellent and wants to make sure that the kids' homework is checked very thoroughly and, wants to make sure that they're going above and beyond. That's about hiring well. And then once you do that, creating the culture in which that kind of person will thrive, and the person who's not like that will not fit in. And that's the job of the principal. And so if we want deeper learning, Linda Darling Hammond out of Stanford talks about the fact that deeper learning is harder to do, right? Which is to say,
by deeper learning, you mean?
I mean, not just memorizing information, but knowing how to apply knowledge, and not just memorizing a math formula, but understanding the underlying concept so that you can possibly solve the problem in 3 different ways and figure out which way is the most important. I think the best example was given in a book that said, you can memorize the properties of arteries and veins, but can you design an artificial artery? Right? That would be a deeper learning experience. So Linda Darling Hammond, who's a well-respected national scholar of deeper learning, says that this kind of learning requires incredible sophistication from teachers. And so that means an investment in professional development and paying people like professionals. Now, Joe, we don't have 2 people in every classroom. It's just that when you walk into a classroom, you'll often see that somebody who perhaps is on their off period was going in to observe someone else to learn from them or to give them feedback, because there's this collegial environment. But yes, it is still definitely all about great teachers, for sure.
And
But
so
also,
the other question I have then is writ large. I mean, the book, everybody, we'll make sure it's in our show notes and people know how to get it. But what I'm really interested in is what kind of can a public school system do this? I mean, is it something that is special to what to the kind of charter school that you've created, or could this be replicated in public school systems,
Right.
state-funded, local school systems?
So there are great public schools that are pursuing deeper learning, but it's much harder when you're constrained by all the bureaucratic rules. Charter schools have freedom from all the bureaucracy in exchange for accountability. And so it's definitely harder. Having said that, to be fair, there are some great non-charter public district schools that do excellent work, but at scale, it's harder.
yeah, well, the thing is that, your students test well. They test as well as students in Westchester County, upper middle class public school system. But you're also teaching them to think well. Testing well isn't enough. Teaching to the test isn't enough. And at the bottom, what you're doing, and this goes to Joe's initial point, and why it's very relevant to where we are in this country right now, is you're creating communities. The first thing that you do when with your kids is to create a community of shared values that they create by sitting in that circle and saying, this is how I want to be treated. And you also create a community of teachers. And and the two communities are interdependent.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that creating communities is not something that we've been very good at this country, especially since we've gotten to be so prosperous after World War II. And that is a lesson from what you're doing on the most practical basis, the simplest basis, teaching kids 1 + 1 is 2, or teaching them to teach themselves that 1 + 1 is 2. If you can do that, the question that I think Joe was getting at was, can it be applied to, in a larger sense, to society? And I think obviously the answer is yes.
Well, I would just put it more. What I'm seeing is all the things Joe just said, but I think more importantly, entwined in all that is teaching civic virtue, or citizenship, or because of that community, because they're setting them, and we don't have that in really, and is it possible? That's what I mean. I'm trying to get to so much of the whole problem that we have today is those communities weren't created. That civic belonging to community of something, that we're collaborating together, and some civic virtue might not be the right way to describe it, but it just seems to me that's intrinsic in what you're actually.
But that is a really important question, and the essence of the question is: do you extrapolate? Do you take, when you teach kids to create their own set of rules for behavior, do you extrapolate and say, here's how we should do that in society as well?
No, but that's a brilliant idea, and I think we should do that. So you've just created the next iteration. No, that's a brilliant idea. To, I want to go back to the first thing you said a moment ago, which was the test results and teaching to the test, because that relates to what Joe T said about civics. So there's only a reading and a math test in most states. From 3rd through 8th grade. And even though there is some writing, it's not a writing test, because if you have to write 3 sentences, it's just a test of whether you understood what you read. So there's no civics, no history, no writing. Remember, writing is thinking, right? Writing reflects thinking. And there's no test on something like, can you research a topic effectively and write a research paper? So the test is so basic, right? And that's why I sought out and found the International Baccalaureate assessments, because they require students to do an immense amount of writing, to learn how to do research. And these things are very tied to civics and to the ideas you're talking about, because when you research one thing very deeply and you're looking at, let's say, 25 different sources on that, you really come to understand it well. And talk about extrapolating, you realize when you encounter other information, you know what? That's just very shallow presentation. That may or may not be right. And the only way you have that lens and understand that is because you had the experience of researching something and realizing how much there is to it, how there are these competing views, and you have to, reconcile them. And then that becomes the foundation upon which you could do that as an adult, who are adults who are shaping the future of society. But none of these things are required on the state tests, even by the regents, which is the New York version of the high school exit exam. So this is why I've been advocating for so many years for performance-based assessment, which is a component of deeper learning, which is one of the things that the International Baccalaureate does. And that's why we're using that. We're the only schools and charter schools in all of New York State that have Montessori and the International Baccalaureate for that reason.
Yeah, and we should emphasize the fact that the International Baccalaureate started in France, right? And has become the gold standard for high school graduates around the world where it is applied. And you've applied it in Harlem. It could be applied anywhere.
Yeah, and you know what else the kids do? Oral exams. And with IA coming up, having kids defend their ideas orally, and the people who grade these tests are the master teachers of the master teachers from around the world. And when they get the test, they don't know, does this kid live on the Upper East Side or in Harlem, or it doesn't matter. They don't know. They're all graded by the same smartest teachers in the world.
But when we were talking about the kids setting up their own system of rules and whether you can extrapolate it into society, an image came to my mind, which was in 2008, John McCain was holding a town meeting, and a woman got up and started saying the worst things in the world about Barack Obama that weren't true. And what John McCain did then was the sort of thing that one of your kids might do, which is to say, look, that's not right. This is, we should all regard, I may disagree with Barack Obama on the issues, but he is a valuable human being. He's a good father.
He's a good man. I remember that.
And it seems to me that sensibility is at the heart of what you try to create in these, what you've succeeded in creating in these schools. And it is no small thing. It is so rare in our society to find that kind of mutual respect.
Yeah,
But
that was the point I was trying to make, is that then they like their parents may not mutually respect their neighbor, and so there's got to be some dissonance going on from when they're in the classroom and they respect these rules in the community in the civic virtue that you've kind of built in, wittingly or not. And then I'm not talking about later in life. I'm talking about 10 minutes later after they leave school. They're entering a world where that civic virtue, that community is at each other's throats, or always, like the women to John McCain. There are very few John McCains left to be that model of that. And so that's what I was trying to get at, is how do we take what you're doing and writ large have the positive impact on society that I think has been missing for decades, for different reasons. Not one, it's not one school district to blame or any of that, but just how do we get to that kind of civic virtue, or whatever it is. But also, we're running out of time, so I want to give you one last.
Running out of time to solve all of society's problems.
All society's problems. But remind us again, name of the book. Give you a chance so people that are watching this know where they can get the book and anything else they can find out about the Harlem Academy.
Oh, well, the website is thewelleducatedchild.org, and the book is available everywhere. So thank you for that.
But I think if step one is buy the book, step two is read the book, because all of these things are described in great detail and anecdotally in the book. Yeah. But then when you've done that, and you're a parent, or you're a school administrator, or a teacher, what's step two?
Well, that's interesting you said that, because John Legend, who wrote the foreword to the book, and it was actually published by his imprint, Get Lifted, he has 4 kids. And the first thing he said, he read the book like on one flight to Europe, I think it was. And he's a really smart guy. And he said, my mind was racing with ideas for how to implement these practices with my own kids. So yeah, thinking about it on a personal level, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I've seen your schools. I've been in your schools. And boy, I wish I could send my kids to Harlem Village, could have sent my kids to Harlem Village Academies.
Well, it was really fun to be with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, Joe. And we'll see you next week with another episode of The Two Joes.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.